Octavio, often referred to as the voice of Kupala. He was a 6th generation Malkavian vampire. He was a mad prophet obsessed with the 8 signs of Gehenna. I just did 10 with my fingers. 8 signs. He also believed himself to be the personification of Havnor, the god of lightning and war. Octavio spent generations trying to warn the other vampires of the coming signs of Gehenna, and when he failed, he fell into a pit of despair, the likes of which he never really recovered from. And he let one of his trainees diablarize him to carry on the good work, as it were. And they would ultimately go on to become the messengers and the harbingers of Gehenna. Today we're going to be talking about Octavio from Vampire the Masquerade in the World of Darkness setting. If lore around World of Darkness and other tabletop games is your thing, then I would love to have you join me at the table. My name's Nathaniel. Let's get into it. Octavio is described as tall, well-muscled, crazy hair that goes everywhere like Einstein, and it is bright red. He had piercing blue eyes that radiated or glowed with this animal intensity. It was said that he basically looked the part of a god of war and lightning. His dress was also from across the ages that he has lived. He was an eclectic mishmash of different societies. Before he was a vampire, when he was a mortal, he was born in the lands that are now considered Hungary, back when they were conquered by the Romans. In those days, Octavio was a shaman and one of some considerable power. He did in some way, either accidentally or on purpose, fuse himself with the dark heart of Kupala. This is how he gained his madness. And when he was eventually turned into a Malkavian, of course the Madness Network and all of that other fun stuff that comes with being Malkavian. In his mortal days, he tried to warn the Romans that there was a demon living in the lands, bound to the earth, and it was poisoning the land and those living within it. The legionnaires, they didn't listen. They were kind to him, they did clothe him, they did feed him, but they passed him off and dismissed him as a raving, nutty lunatic. Part of the problem was that he didn't speak Latin. Once he learned how to speak Latin and then was able to more effectively communicate his problems, they still dismissed him as a stark raving lunatic. Octavio did not always go by this name. He had a different name, but it has been lost to the annals of history. Octavio was a name he bestowed upon himself. He took it because he believed the 8 signs of Gehenna were coming, and this is what his name represents, 8. Eventually he was turned by a Roman Malkavian who kind of took pity on him. In the time that followed, Octavio subsisted quite well on the Roman soldiers living there. But the poison, the madness from the connection of Kupala eventually led him to do darker and darker things. The height of this was when Octavio staked and diablarised his sire. This of course further fueled his own ravings, his own teachings that Gehenna was coming, and as time continued, Octavio began to slip in and out of torpor. One of the times that Octavio went into this deep sleep, this slumber of torpor, the legionnaires were called back home. Octavio was working on a plan, one that involved apotheosis. What he was doing was he was hoping to gain enough influence as a deity, as a godlike figure. Once he had attained enough power, he would oppose Kupala directly. To Octavio, Kupala awakening was Gehenna. Octavio did develop quite a following, and those who believed in him, who worshipped him, they called him Havnor. They believed he was an ancient Magyar god. Octavio didn't really care about the title and the respect that came with being a deity. What he cared about was, one, being sustained because he would drink the blood of his worshippers, his followers, but he wanted more strength. He wanted them to believe and grant power to him. Only with enough faith would he actually be able to oppose Kupala. At least that's what he believed in his own mind. Just a quick note on this, apotheosis has existed for vampires for a long time. The early generations of vampires, they were already godlike in the things that they could do, in their abilities. Some of them, like the Setite antediluvian, were already revered as gods. Now Octavio, he hears Kupala's voice in his head, and when this happens, he tends to enter a fugue-like state. He calls it receiving prophecy. In this state, sometimes he would come up with plans. Other times he would receive visions, things that he didn't quite understand and would try to interpret to his mortal realm. Now Kupala was a demon bound to the earth in a ritual he created that was taken and used by werewolves. This ritual thus created the Appalachian Mountains. Being bound to this very large reliquary for quite some time, Kupala had made it his business to know everything that was happening around him. Sensing an intrusion in his lands, this is how he met Octavio. And for whatever reason, Kupala chose Octavio to disseminate his plans. Now, demonic beings and humans, even vampires, they don't necessarily communicate on the same scale. So the messages and things that Kupala was trying to communicate, they didn't come across very well for Octavio, and he did his best to interpret them. In fact, he got them wrong most of the time. Now, during the Dark Ages, Octavio built his own haven in the round house beneath Obuda. Now, during this time, he gathered a lot of secrets. He had a lot of visions from Kupala. Unfortunately, he doesn't remember any of his visions or anything that he learned during this period of time. He was a great prophet. Those that followed him during this period of time, they developed their own strangeness, their own insanities, trying to understand what he was saying and follow his directions. It wasn't until he passed on his skill set, his belief system through Anatole, that things really took off for Kupala. Now, Anatole was a signature character in Vampire: The Dark Ages. In his mortal life, he was extremely spiritual. In his undead life, his vampire life, he was extremely religious. Some might say to the point of religious fanaticism. He followed the road to heaven and the path of true faith. That last one, basically, if you believe and have faith in something hard enough, it will happen. You can faith it into existence. Anatole wanted to guide the vampires into God's plan, to use them for the betterment of the society. However, when it came to the final nights, he was more of a harbinger of doom. Anatole was also a gifted Gehenna scholar. However, he was only second to Beckett. And these two were, of course, good friends. Anatole, Beckett, and Lucita, they would travel the world together, trying to find answers to vampires' existence and what could be done to cure them of this disease. But who was Anatole and where did he come from? Anatole was French, if you haven't figured that out with the name already. All of these lives, this living, it is shit. But maybe this undeath, maybe there's something to this, huh? Anatole was born under a blue moon in Paris. He was the eldest son of the City Watch commander, and as was the custom or the expectation of the eldest son, you followed in the footsteps of the father. So he also became a guardsman in the City Watch. Through his entire life, Anatole felt like he had a higher calling, something that he was supposed to be doing, but wasn't. He pretty much single-handedly inspired the pious vampire. He would eventually become embraced by another vampire, Pierre, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, L'Imbécile. Pierre believed through his interactions and time he spent with Anatole, he could see the workings of God. He believed he would be the perfect servant for the faith, and that is why he embraced him. Pierre told Anatole that his reason for existing, the whole concept of his life, was to prove all beings, whether they served God or whether they were damned, were part of God's plan and acted towards that whether they wanted to or not. There was a very short training period, and then Pierre released Anatole to the world. Stay tuned for a video on Anatole coming up. But if you want to learn more about Kupala, check this video out here. Thank you to all of my patrons who support me and the channel. All of your support is greatly appreciated. My name's Nathaniel. Thanks for stopping by, everyone.